Hello, this is Patric McCoy, and I'm an art collector. I really should say that I'm an activist art collector because I actually believe that the term art collector actually implies that you have to do something in regards to the culture, the visual arts culture, as a result of you now acquiring art. You should do something. You should be motivated to do something to promote the visual arts culture, because you find these things so important. Today, I'm going to be talking about this perspective from the art collector's view, because I think that's important, because it's so unrecognized or unappreciated in the larger art scene today. I'm going to be giving you my perspective. I'm going to start from a macro level and then work down to the micro level of this description of the art scene. And at the micro level, I'm going to be speaking as an African American that happens to live in Chicago, that is an activist art collector. But I'm going to start at the larger level of just how the whole art scene is structured from my perspective. All right, a little background. I mentioned that I'm an art collector, and I have a collection you should have seen in some of the information that was provided for in the syllabus. Should have seen some of the articles that are written about my collection and some of my views. But I've been collecting since 1968, mainly in the African American art scene here in Chicago. I'm feel very strongly about the Chicago art scene. I started out as a young person wanting to be an artist, but quickly shifted over into the sciences. So professionally, I have worked in science and engineering with the Environmental Protection Agency for 30 plus years and so forth. And have not thought of myself for most of that time as an art collector. That has been recent, when I'm saying recent, like 25 plus years that I've thought of myself as an art collector. All right, I'm going to give you a rundown from the perspective of an art collector of what I understand the art world. I'm going to be giving you, through this presentation, my views as I see it, and I'm predicating that it is the perspective of an art collector. And I believe that that's important to hear, because so often the art collector has been left out of the discussion. All right. During this process, I'm going to be providing a few little historical tidbits, and also going to ask some questions for you, the audience, to ponder and to think about and possibly bring to the colloquium. All right, I'm going to start at the macro level, the very largest level. I believe that there are art worlds, but what I have seen in my life is that there is a predominant view that there's only one art world. That this is it. It's the one that dominates all the discussions and so forth. And it is coming out of Western civilization. It is, and we know today that there are many civilizations that are existing today on the planet, but Western civilization is the predominant one. And when you look at it, it has an art world that it says is the only one that's of any import, and that it gets its basis from philosophical concepts that were developed early in European antiquity, usually starting with around the Greek, ancient Greek civilization, and proceeding up to today. The same kind of concepts and discourse flows out of that. And I'm emphasizing that this is the one that is perceived to be predominant today. In this art world that I see, it's been characterized with the artist and they're known, and we've got names of them, and you go to the museums and see them. But the artists that have been discussed and presented in this art world have, for most of the time, been controlled by very, very powerful people and through a system of patronage. They were effectively almost, I'm going to say the word, that they were controlled almost at the level of this of a serf or a slave or something like that. Is that they were controlled completely. Is that they had no independent existence as an artist for most of that time. And I would say most leading up to maybe about 200 years ago, that we start to see a new concept of the artist as an independent entity that has the ability to have thoughts and to have a career and to have even an entrepreneurial concept of dealing with its products, its art. This patronage, as I said, kind of extended for up to about 200 years. It still is in existence, that there are people that have artists that they are the patrons of, and that artist is basically dependent to most extent to that patron. They depend on it. But we now have this new art world that's kind of taken and come out of the one that has been in existence for several thousand years in the West. And it is now a one that is predominantly a capitalistic system where art is done for profit, and that everything has to be around how much profit can be attained through the transactions of art. And the art collector is, in this system that exists today, the consumer. And so as a result, it's kind of like at the bottom of the schema. And I have a bit of a problem with that. I was looking around to try to come up with a visual representation of my perspective, because I believe that this art world that we are operating in has put Europe and its history and even its present day situation in an outsized importance in controlling what this discourse, this art discourse that is occurring across the planet. And this discourse is about how much value economically these pieces are. And it is focused on mainly the artists that have come out of Europe or are been directly affected by Europe, and of the acquisitions that Europeans have made over these years. And these acquisitions can be those that have actually been purchased legally or bequeathed legally, and those that have been illegally acquired through conquest and theft and so forth, but are now captured into their major institutions, museums and so forth, and are now given extremely high values. So I was looking for a way to pictorially describe that, and because I wanted to show the importance, the outsized importance of Europe. And I came across this cartogram, which does show Europe in a much bigger relationship to the rest of the continent, and especially when you see South America and Africa just like minuscule in relationship to the size of Europe. And then you see China and India are very looming large, and the United States is kind of small. But this was a cartogram of 1900 population. And so it, for my purposes, is a little bit distorted because the United States should be a lot bigger. But the three big areas that are dominating the art world today are Europe and China and the United States. So the United States, this 1900 cartogram doesn't fully depict what I'm trying to portray. But if you think of the United States as a bigger entity, and India could be a little bit smaller, but not too much more, because it does have an import. I saw recently the 2020 assessment of art transactions, because that is very important in this art world, is how much money is transacted. And China, Europe, and the United States are the three power players. This is where most of the transactions of record have taken place, and the amount of monies was on the order of about $50 billion. All right, this major art world is made up of networks, art networks. There's a multitude of these networks, and I want to stress that this is really where most of the action takes place, is in these networks. There's a multiple number of these networks in this art world that we believe is the predominant one or the only one, which is not true. And they are functioning at national and provincial and down to the urban levels. And these networks of entities and individuals all have similar components. And what I see is that they all work together to constantly increase the profits that are to be made by institutions and individuals who are investing in this art world, that they consider that this is primarily an investment concept. And you have things like the auction houses, the museums, the art critics, and all of the publications, the publications on art, transactions and auctions and sales and so forth, the art historians and the consultants, the art dealers, people that are specifically involved in the investment concept, telling people how to invest, the biennials and the art fairs, the galleries, all of the art appraisers. Then we have things like the celebrity artists, i.e. in this whole global one art world, there is usually somebody identifying, oh, the top 30 or the top 100 artists. We have 7 billion people on the planet. 100 artists cannot even begin to reflect what is actually going on. And then we have a smaller set of people who are considered collectors, art collectors. And these are the celebrity collectors. And again, there's 70 billion people on the planet, 7 billion people on the planet. And there can't be that 100 or so collectors cannot be considered to reflect what is actually happening in a true art world. All right, this art world that I've been talking about is a top-down model. It's a top-down system. Is that set of components, these art networks, mainly dealing with the museums and the auction houses and so forth, they actually are dictating what is identifiable as good, as important, as valuable, as high import. And then the rest of the components of these networks are constantly fortifying and presenting that position down to the average person. So we are being told through this system what is good and what is important and what should be acquired. Okay, I have a problem with a top-down model of an art world. As I've been kind of alluding, is that in this world, even though it is very important, and as I just said, $50 billion in 1 year, it has a great impact. But what I believe, and I think I could argue with you, But I believe that most of the people, and that would be artists and art appreciators and collectors, do not operate within that art world. That art world, even though it is huge in impact financially, does not even begin to include all of the people that are involved in the visual arts culture. So that's a myth that this is the art world, because most of the transactions and do not occur in this art world. They are outside of it. And that we need to, in our discussions, we need to actually think about how to either put this art world in a proper perspective or to destroy the myth that that is the only one, because it does block the creation of what I consider a vibrant and viable visual arts culture at the macro level, and also as you go down to the micro level, is that people get stymied, artists and appreciators, i.e. collectors, get stymied by belief that this art world is the only one. All right. These are the concepts that I believe have to be dispelled, that there is this celebrity group of art collectors and they're the only ones that are important, and that they are an elite class of people, and that in order to use the term, you have to be in this class. And that, as I mentioned in that in the beginning, is that the art collector in this discourse has actually been, even though we do have this promotion of the celebrity art collector, but the actual act of art collecting has been under-recognized and underappreciated and pushed down, and that now the discourse is all about how artists function, how artists think, and how what they are trying to accomplish. And there's nothing wrong with that, but it is that it is done, that these artists' concepts are done in a vacuum, that there is not a whole set of people that are behind that are appreciating and pushing that, and that you don't know who these folks are, these people are. And that most important, that art making and art collecting has got to be thought of in other terms than that this is a business. That there is nothing wrong with having business concepts, but it is not first and foremost a business. All right, now I'm going to give you a little tidbit, a history, by asking you a question. Do you know who this person is, Bertha Palmer? Again, I have to identify that I'm a Chicagoan, so I'm going to be using things that reference Chicago. And she was a Chicagoan. She lived in the 19th century in Chicago, and she was an art collector. She was married to Potter Palmer, a major civic leader in Chicago. He was the one that essentially created the Marshall Fields Company, and they were rich. In American standards, they were rich. They were in the Gilded Age, but in the Gilded Age, Europe predominant was over everything. Is that France was the headquarters, the center of the art world at that time, and American rich people, even though they were rich, were considered nouveau riche, and they were not considered as being important. They were not in the elite as what we would think of the multi-rich people in America today would be at the top of the pile. But in that time, they were not. They were kind of second-class rich people. And they would come to Europe and would the grand tour, and she did this herself. She went to Europe many, many times and would be interested in acquiring artwork. Now, what she did and influenced a whole lot of her friends, other nouveau riche Americans, was to look at this avant-garde art community that the French looked down on, did not think that was important. And even other American art collectors looked down on, because the Barbizon school was the art that you wanted to have back in the 1870s and the 1880s. That's what that was the stuff. That was the important thing. And she went to look at these avant-garde artists that we now know are the Impressionists, and she started acquiring them. So she's operating outside. She's not operating as the elite art collectors. She's operating outside of that and bringing this stuff back to Chicago and acquiring it to the point that she has this a massive collection, and it ends up being the beginnings of the Art Institute of Chicago. And then all of her friends and so forth start contributing to work for that. So here is a person that in today's world, I look at her and I say, oh, she's part of an elite set of people, but she would not have been at that time. But she is doing very similar to what I am arguing all of us need to do, is that as an art collector, you see something you like and you become motivated to be active, not just to acquire and squirrel away things for yourself, but to actually be active and to try to bring about some sort of change. So I look at her, even though she's long gone and would have truly been able to be a elite person in my world with the monies that she had available to her. I see her as an activist art collector and very similar to the types of things that I've been doing in my life. And I want to end with the concept that this story that I'm telling you about Bertha Palmer, I would like, if you know some other art collectors that have been ignored in art history, that you bring those to share at the colloquium. All right. So I'm going to go back. Oh, God. I'm sorry. Oh, okay. What I believe, anyone could be an art collector. So even though I'm talking about Bertha Palmer, so forth, I actually believe that we all have the potential to be art collectors because it's really a very simple thing to do. This art world that I've been talking about tends to make it seem very complex and a very elitist activity, but I think it's a very simple activity to be an art collector. And I believe that both the artists and the collectors that are operating outside of this not-for-profit, this for-profit art world and the networks have been unrecognized and unappreciated, but they make up the majority, the overwhelming majority of all the people operating in art networks, i.e. that this for-profit network that seems so huge is just one of many, and these other art networks that are sitting outside of it actually make up the majority of all of the art transactions, art networks that are on the planet. And one of the problems that I'm going to be discussing is that we have to increase, all of us, the audience for the visual arts, is that we are suffering because most of the people want to exclude themselves from it. And that the artists are, that yes, they have ideas and concepts that they want to promote, but they are essentially cultural workers. Bringing to all human beings the benefit of having expressions and ideas presented to them visually. We have musicians that do it with music. We have people do it with theater and poetry and dance and so forth, but the artists are doing it with the visual arts. All right, as I said, I'm an activist art collector, and I had to, after recognizing the importance of being an art collector, co-founded an organization called Diaspora Rhythms. It's a Chicago-based organization that has been unique in promoting art collecting in the Black community, in the African-American community. And we've been doing that for 18 years. And we do that by attacking the myths on art collecting. And this is what I've kind of been alluding to in the early parts of this discussion. that myths are controlling and directing the art world, and that's to its disadvantage. I have put in the curriculum a reference to Dr. Diane Graham's book, Producing Local Color, Art Networks in Ethnic Chicago. This book was important to me, not mainly because she spent about a third of the book talking about my organization, but that she identifies, using Chicago and research, her social research in Chicago, that there is clearly this center and dominant art world in Chicago, in the main part of the city, which we call the Loop, that's made of museums and auction houses and galleries and so forth. There's nothing wrong, that exists, but it is not the only one. And so her book explores 3 different ones that have been under the radar, not recognized by the main one. In fact, even today, most of the people in the museum world do not know about these very vibrant art networks that are taking place in Chicago. And she posits in her book, and I'm taking her idea, that there are many unrecognized art networks all across the country, in every city, every state, every village and towns, in communities. There's all kinds that most people are not talking about. They exist, they operate, but we're not recognizing them. All right, we've been one, and we've been successful in our 18-year existence because we have focused on the #1 problem in the African-American art scene. And that #1 problem is the same problem in all the others. It's the absence of the audience, is that people do not come to art events because they do not believe that it's for them. And I've had these discussions many times talking to people, why didn't you come, so forth? Well, they would say, that's for art collectors, which if you think about it, what they're saying is I'm not an art collector and therefore I'm not invited. Even though I always joke about that art events are the one cultural event in this culture, and I think across the world, where it's free to come in and you can almost be guaranteed you're going to have some kind of food and some kind of a drink. And I'm thinking, and you almost have to beg and beat people to come to go see this. And it's like, it's free and you got something to eat and to drink. So this concept that I'm not invited is very, very strong. And I believe that this problem exists everywhere. Okay, we've worked for years to try to change this mindset, to increase the audience, to make people feel as though that they actually are invited, actually have the capability of being art collectors, and that it's something that should be seen as not an elitist concept, but one that everybody is involved in. And I always use the reference to the musical culture that exists in this country and almost in every country, and that everybody thinks of themselves as being a part of the musical culture. No one feels like I'm outside of that, whereas people do feel that they are outside of the visual arts culture. All right, this journey of becoming an art collector, I actually spent a lot of time angsting over it. And when I have talked to members of my organization about their history of recognizing themselves as art collectors, they all basically have the same story, is that they had to, and myself included, had to unlearn some things. They had to reject myths and misconceptions about just what an art collector is. And that it is a process, because these things are so deep-seated, these beliefs they're so deep-seated that it makes it difficult to transition to becoming an art collector. When in real terms, to be an art collector is very, very easy. All you have to do is just buy art and you're an art collector. That's the simplest way in which our language works philosophically and by logic and so forth. You just buy art, you collect, and you're an art collector. So it's a very easy thing to do, yet most people have a real problem. So why are we so resistant? And as I said, we have these very strong beliefs, and that blocks us culturally. These are terms that, as concepts and conversations that I have heard, and I believe that you might have heard them too. As I've come about becoming an art collector, I pay attention to what people say. And these are some snippets of things that I think you can relate to, is that you will hear people say too often when you essentially try to present something that deals with art or even try to get them to come to an art event, they will quickly say, I don't know anything about art. And then there are people that might actually be acquiring art, and you confront them and say, oh, that's really nice and so forth. And they'll say, I'm not an art collector, I just buy what I like. And then there are people who say, I can't afford art. And I'm thinking, how do you get to this point? We have people that believe that if the artist dies, that somehow the artwork now has instantly a greater value. And I'm saying, where did we get these ideas? And that if you say you're an art collector and you approach an artist, then you have the right to require them to treat you as something special, and that they should give you a different financial transaction. They should be giving you a deal because you say you're an art collector. Converse is that artists could say, okay, if you say you're an art collector, you should buy my work, i.e. you have to buy. And I'm thinking, where do these concepts come from? But they are very entrenched. All right, they are not true. And these things have kept most people from identifying as art collectors. And therefore, they have kept them out of the audience. And what I've analyzed from myself and from talking to other people, that the key issues are that people believe, number one, that in order to say you're an art collector, you have to be wealthy. In fact, you have to be super rich, super wealthy. And this is promoted and supported by all the media conversations, the whole emphasis on transactions of art that are extremely high in value. The newspaper has major headlines of a $200 million art sale and what happened in Sotheby's or Christie's and so forth, that someone bought this and it broke records. So that's what gets promoted. And therefore, that is the idea that goes into people's heads, that in order to acquire art, you have to have some extremely large amounts of money, because the transactions are going to be very, very expensive. So it locks in and promotes this misconception that an art transaction could actually be very reasonable, to the point that it's not even a thought, that most of the things that you bought in other aspects of your life cost much more than a piece of art. So this concept that you have to be wealthy is at the forefront. The second one that keeps people from identifying themselves as art collectors is that if you say that you're an art collector, you have to be of the personality type that is very private, that you want to keep this knowledge that you are acquiring art away from the average person, that you're going to be very concerned about security and the very concerned about the well-being of the art pieces, that you have to replicate in your environment the same kinds of conditions that exist in the museums, which are focused on preservation of art. So you have to be concerned about the traffic in your home, and that you do not want people to know what you have, because i.e. ... they will come back and steal it. That you're very concerned about theft. That is a very strong belief that this is an essential characteristic of being an art collector. A third one that we hear all the time is that if you are an art collector, you have an academic, an encyclopedic knowledge of art. You know everything. You know what every artist that has ever walked the planet. You can identify any art piece presented to you, and people do that to me all the time. Come to me and show me a piece and say, who is this and where is it from? And I'm like, I have no idea. Is that one, look at the signature, would be first thing. But two is that I didn't study this. I studied chemistry and environmental science. I didn't study art. So, and that it is not in my bailiwick to know all of this art. Now, all the artists that have ever been around, or even the ones in my community, I can't know all of that stuff. But that is the impression, and the belief is that you do. You're supposed to, if you say you're an art collector, you're supposed to know everything. The fourth thing that's very important in most people's heads about art collector is that somehow you can know and predict the future economic value of any art piece. That you are Swami, you can know with certainty that this thing is going to be worth $10,000 in 5 years and so forth. I don't have a clue what it is, what its economic value will be, because that's not important. And I don't believe that it is a component of being an art collector that has any value. Though this art world that we're in, and especially since the perception that an art collector is super wealthy, that then the value is implied that you have to know that, because that's what you're doing. You are always concerned about the investment concept, so you want to know its economic value at all times. All right. None of these statements are true. That was the epiphany I made 20 years ago, 25 years ago, and allowed me now to say, oh no, I actually am an art collector, and these things that I used to believe are not true. In addition to these myths that I just described, there are other things that need to be dispelled. Everybody believes if you go into art, this statement that just drives me nuts. If you choose to go into the art field, you're going to starve, because there's this prevalent concept of the starving artist. That is not true. And there's same time that there's this concept of the starving artist, there's the belief that artwork is always going to be too expensive. And that is not true. In fact, logically, if you put the two together, you come up with a non sequitur. It just doesn't make any sense. How is it that somebody that is starving can make something that is too expensive for you to buy? It just doesn't make any sense. But we believe that. Okay, and as I said before, the fact that a person dies does not mean that which they made is always now going to be more important. It doesn't. If it was important before, it's going to be important afterwards. If it wasn't, it doesn't. Their death does not make it important. Now, if you're in a world, if you're only operating in the economic world, and therefore the concept is that there's now not going to be any more new things, then the supply is now limited and the value will go up. But it's not because they died. that made the value go up. And then there's these issues about art collectors that are not true. And I run into it all the time where people hear me say that I'm an art collector, and then they just they believe that that implies that I have to buy their work, that I'm almost like a machine, that you just stick the card in and the money comes out. No, it doesn't work that way. And that there are people that believe that if you come into the room and you're an art collector, that now you're in a different status. It's not. You're just like anybody else. Okay. And how do we dispel these myths? This is how we did it with our organization, is that we believe that you have to create situations that bring people that make art together with those who collect art. You bring the artists and the art collectors, art appreciators together as many times as possible. And what I've seen is a characteristic of this one macro art world that's involved with profit, is that they try to keep the artists and the art collector or art appreciators away from each other. They don't want them to be connected. They want to have intermediaries in between them so that there's not that simpatico relationship of the appreciator and the art maker. And we should create as many situations where art collections can be seen. The museums and institutions should not be the only places where you can see an art collection. Because art collections, there are many different types, and we should all be seeing all the different varied ways in which human beings have put together the visual arts. And artists should be honored, and not just the 100 best. In a planet with 7 billion people, we should be creating all types of situations at all types of levels where we are giving our visual artists some recognition of what they are contributing to our culture. So this is how we've done it. Our organization in the African American community in Chicago, we have started a whole program of biannual collector home tours where we open up our homes. We let people come in and see our collections, and we talk about them. We have artists that are in our collections there to talk to them. We involve young people, high school students, to be docents and so forth. We are exposing people to show them this is the art that's in our community. And here you can talk to the artist, and this is how we're displaying it, different from possibly how a museum or a gallery would display it. And we're not afraid of you coming in our homes because we don't believe you're going to come back tomorrow and steal the work. So we've been doing that now for 18 years, and to great success and great accolades, that people are moved and changed by coming into and seeing art collections right in their own community. We also have started programs of honoring artists where we take the artists that the collectors in our organization will have some sort of like a ballot, say, who do we think needs to be recognized that we're collecting today? And so we put on situations and honor them and try to arrange for them to have shows in galleries and museums to give them the recognition that we believe that they deserve. We also have youth programs where we engage young people in the high school and elementary schools and introduce them to artists, professional artists, and also engage them in doing projects. And in fact, this image is where we had a high school student. She was interviewing an artist that she liked his work and made a presentation about this artist's career at Art Center in the community. We also allow young people to come and visit our collections separate from our collector's home tour, because we believe that they need to be exposed to it as early as possible, and that they see things that adults don't see in art, because their eyes are open and they're not concerned about this art world of profit. They're looking at images and just seeing and responding directly to what they see and feel. We also organize studio visits to get more and more art appreciators to have a close contact with the art makers and find out how they're working, what they're working on, their motivations and so forth, where they can have that direct contact with the art maker. We also provide and set up situations where artists can come into public organizations and art centers and so forth and put on demonstrations for the public to educate them about their process and their practice. We also schedule our meetings of our organization in each other's homes so that our members can see art collections of the other members, so that and be introduced through that to artists that they might not have known about. So we're creating and operating within an art network that the downtown for-profit art world just has no knowledge of. And so we believe that these are important actions to dispel these myths and to create a more vibrant visual arts culture. And in the process, we believe that that can create an energy that is a bottom up, not to say it doesn't have to replace any of the components of the art world, but just show that the energy can be going up just as it can be going down. Is that the average art collector can be a part of a process which informs the other aspects, the other components of the art network of artists and art activities that they might not have been aware of, and that they can essentially expand this small set of artists that they feel like are the 100 best and so forth to be more reflective of what really are the really great artists on this planet. And the number is many orders of magnitude greater than 100. In conclusion, I believe that, as you can see, I believe anyone can be an art collector, and anyone should be an art collector, just as we have almost everybody on the planet is a music collector in one shape or fashion or form. And that the first and foremost, an artist is a cultural worker. The business aspect is important, but it is not the primary one. That they should be thinking of themselves and acting and being appreciated as cultural workers. I would also wave the hat of Chicago as being a great city to be an artist and an art collector, because this city was founded by a Black man, Jean Baptiste Pont du Sable, back in the latter half of the 18th century. He established a spot on the river right at the junction with the lake, and created the foundation for the city of Chicago. When he left Chicago in 1800, there was a deed of sale because he sold all of his property. And in that deed, they identified that he owned 23 paintings. They identified everything he had, all the chickens, the nails, the hammers, all of this stuff. And in that list, there's identified 23 paintings. That, when I first found out about that, that just boggled my mind. It's just amazing that here in a wilderness, because Chicago was all the way in the wilderness of the Atlantic world. It was all the way, no roads, nothing. And this man had 23 paintings. It just astounds me that he could get that kind of work into a space that's in the wilderness. So we have, as Chicagoans, we have the pride to know that our founder was an art collector, and he was the very first art collector, and that he more than likely set the stage for me and Bertha Palmer, that this should be a city of art collectors. Thank you very much.